Hello everyone, I will share real stories that I know and I'm sure you will like them.
The flight, the suite, the champagne on ice, it was all compliments of my husband's boss. What he didn't know was what I gave in return. My name is Lisa. I turned 47 last November, and if you'd told me 5 years ago that I'd be in this position, telling this story, I would have laughed and called you crazy. I live just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, in a cul-de-sac neighborhood where the lawns are trimmed and the problems stay hidden behind closed doors. My husband, Dean, works in corporate logistics. He's been with the same company for 18 years. Solid, dependable, predictable, like a Honda with good mileage. We met in college. He brought me soup when I had strep throat and helped me pass statistics. I married him for the kindness in his eyes and the steady way he held me when the world felt shaky. But lately, that steadiness had turned into distance. Long silences. The kind where he's sitting next to you, but you may as well be 100 miles apart. Our kids are grown, one in Austin, one in grad school upstate. The house echoes now. I echo. I volunteer at the local arts council. I make dinner. I fold his shirts and tuck lavender sachets into the drawers. I smile when he walks in, even when he barely looks up from his phone. I've been good. I've been patient. But sometimes, even a good woman starts to feel invisible. The first time I met Alec was at Dean's company Christmas party. He shook my hand firmly, looked me dead in the eyes, and smiled like he saw something he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't handsome in the traditional way. His nose had clearly been broken once, his hair just a shade too long for corporate. But there was something about him. The way he stood slightly too close. The way he said my name like it was already a secret. Alec was Dean's boss. Regional VP. Twice divorced. 49, with no kids, and a reputation that made the junior assistants blush when he walked into the office. I didn't know all that when he handed me a glass of champagne and asked if I always wore emerald green because it makes your eyes dangerous. I laughed. Too hard, maybe. Dean didn't even look up. He was talking shop with 2 other guys from the warehouse division, his back turned. Later that night, Alec asked if I wanted to see the rooftop view from the penthouse suite. I said no, but I didn't say it right away. After that party, I thought about Alec more than I should have. At first, I brushed it off. Just flattery. Just boredom. But a month later, Dean came home with a surprise. Alec's sending me to the Reno site for 2 weeks, he said, pulling open the fridge. They need me to reorganize the distribution flow. He offered to fly you out for a few days on the company's dime. Said you deserved a little break. I blinked. Alec offered that? Yeah. Said you made an impression. I stared at the fridge door, suddenly chilled. I flew out the following week. First class ticket. A note in the seat pocket. Hope you enjoy the view. Hey! At the resort, Dean was tied up with work until dinner. I spent the afternoon by the pool, oversized sunglasses, a book I never opened. Around 2 p.m., I heard a voice. You burn easy, or are you just staring the sun to misbehave? It was Alec. I looked up. He wasn't in a suit, just khakis, sunglasses, and a smirk that suggested he already knew my answer. We talked for an hour. About everything and nothing. He asked about my kids, my art, what I really wanted to be doing with my time. Not once did he mention Dean. That night, he arranged a private wine tasting for select guests. There were only 3 of us there, and I was the only woman. He poured me a glass of something dark and red and expensive, then leaned in close and said, you know, Lisa, your husband's a lucky man. But I think he forgets that. My heartbeat in places I'd forgotten could feel. The next day, Dean was stuck in meetings again. Alec texted me at noon. Fancy some air? I know a place with a view that's worth the risk. I hesitated for 10 full minutes. Then I replied, where? He drove us out to the hills above Lake Tahoe. We stood on a rocky overlook, the lake glinting below like spilled silver. The wind tugged at my hair. I felt alive for the first time in years. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. We sat there until the sun began to dip, our shoulders nearly touching, the space between us heavy and trembling. He finally turned to me and said, Tell me to stop. I didn't. But then my phone buzzed. It was Dean. A text. Dinner at 7. You coming? I pulled away like I'd been burned. I have to go. Alec didn't stop me, but his eyes followed me all the way back to the car. As I walked into the hotel room that night, Dean looked up from his laptop. Have fun? He asked absently. I nodded. My heart was still racing. I didn't tell him where I'd been. I didn't tell him whose scent was still tangled in my scarf. And I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up before Dean. The sun was spilling across the sheets, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. But then I saw my scarf draped across the chair, still faintly carrying the scent of Alec's cologne, spicy, earthy, impossible to ignore. I pressed it to my face before I could stop myself. My hands trembled. Dean stirred, rolled over, and muttered, "Breakfast downstairs?" I nodded, my throat dry. Sure. We sat across from each other at a table by the window. He scrolled through emails while I stirred my coffee until it was cold. I wanted him to notice, to ask me something, anything. But all he said was, "Alec asked if you'd enjoyed yesterday." I blinked. You talked to him? He texted. Said you two ran into each other at the Overlook. He's got good taste. Beautiful spot. I forced a smile. Yeah, it was. Dean didn't look up. Didn't sense the panic rising behind my ribs. Alec had told him. Or had he? That day, I avoided the pool. I stayed in the hotel spa, had a massage, stared at the ceiling for nearly 2 hours, hearing Alec's voice echo in my mind. Tell me to stop. I hadn't. And I wasn't sure I wanted to. That night, Alec invited us both to dinner. A high-end restaurant overlooking the water. Dean sat beside me, but the conversation felt triangular, like Alec was pulling on a thread between just him and me, one neither of us was willing to cut. He asked about my art again. Said he'd Googled a piece I'd had in a small gallery 5 years ago. I hadn't even remembered mentioning it. You don't create anymore? He asked. I shook my head. Life got full. You mean it got small? I looked down at my plate. Dean was too busy dissecting quarterly forecasts to hear the weight in Alec's voice. After dessert, Alec leaned over and said quietly, "You should paint again. Not for anyone else. Just for you." The next morning, he sent up a package to our room. Inside, a small set of travel watercolors, brushes, and a blank sketch pad. No note. I told Dean the concierge must have delivered it to the wrong room. He shrugged. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the suite's balcony chair, brush in hand, trying to remember how to blend blues into shadows. I didn't paint anything specific, just movement. Chaos. Longing. That evening, Dean got called away for a site emergency. I stayed behind. At 8:15, there was a knock at my door. It was Alec. He stood there holding a bottle of wine. Thought maybe you could use a critic. I let him in. We talked for hours. He asked questions Dean hadn't asked me in years. About who I used to be. What I gave up. What I missed. We sat close, too close. At one point, he reached out and traced the edge of my wrist where paint had dried. It's still in you, you know. You're not lost. Something inside me cracked. I looked at him and whispered, I don't know how to be this woman anymore. He leaned in, not touching me, not quite. You don't have to be. Just be here. The air between us burned. We crossed no lines that could be seen. But we crossed every line that mattered. I thought I was being careful. I deleted texts. I watched my tone when I mentioned Alec. I came home from that trip quiet, distracted, but still married. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Then one morning, I came downstairs to find Dean sitting at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, a strange look on his face. Did you forget your phone last night? He asked, voice calm. I froze. No. Why? He slid it across the table toward me. My heart stopped. There, open on the screen, was a draft of a message I never meant to send. I dreamt about the balcony. I couldn't sleep after. I still feel your hand on me. I'd typed it. Never sent it. I must have fallen asleep with the phone still open. Dean stared at me. Not angry, Not yet. Just broken. Alec? I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He stood, slow and steady, and said only this. You gave more to a stranger in 4 days than you've given to me in 4 years. He left. No shouting. No door slammed. Just silence. 3 hours later, I saw the alert. Flight itinerary. Charlotte to San Diego. One way. I called. No answer. I texted. Nothing. Then another ping. From Alec. I didn't want this. But I'm not sorry either. That night, I stood in our bedroom, surrounded by 30 years of a life built on routine, comfort, habit, and something else I hadn't named until it was gone. Love? Maybe. Or maybe just fear of loneliness dressed in commitment's clothes. I picked up Dean's ring from the nightstand. He'd taken it off. Left it for me to find. I slipped it into the drawer and closed it gently. I don't know where he is now. I don't know if he'll come back. I do know this. Alec offered me freedom wrapped in temptation. Dean offered me loyalty wrapped in silence. And I gave myself away for a moment that felt like truth. But truth doesn't build a life. It burns one down. Final line, he left.